So where's the office, back at Division?
In the office, baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention?
What time is it?
I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story.
Now Myers to win the league, yes!
And I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Well, hello and welcome to the Below the Rim show, a show dedicated to the BBL. Of course, it's me, Pabz. It's just me. Although I've just got people at my breakfast table looking at me funny because it's breakfast time here in the Pablo Cheeks household. They're both staring at me like I'm mad. Morning.
Hello.
Hi. So yeah, by popular demand, we're going to go back into the archives and pop in an episode that I did with Dan Routledge a while ago, which is a bit historical. We're looking at the best players in the history of the BBL and almost kind of bringing it up to speed. So we thought we'd pop that in there today. Myself and Ads are going to do a podcast at some point, which could just be a kind of general life and basketball kind of thing. Not to mention the draft podcast that we're going to have coming up. We're going to try and get some GB guys on as well ahead of the Euros that's coming up, which should be very entertaining on the show there. We were looking at some baby seagulls on the roof of the house opposite. And, yeah. Anyway, without further ado, let's introduce myself. Bearing in mind this was from the FBBL podcast, which is a little while ago. But let's bring in myself, of course, and Mr. Dan Routledge for the greatest BBL players ever. That leads us on a fairly decent segue to kind of what I wanted to get you on the show for this time is looking at champions of the past, essentially, looking at some of the best players we've had in the BBL over the years, and you myself as well. I've witnessed a lot of these players play. I'm interested in your take on if we're going to kind of assemble a squad, the greatest BBL squad of all time, definitely from yesteryear. I'm not sure how sort of recent you would go for that, but I've been trawling through bits and bobs and stats and whatnot from the past, and it's all really prior to sort of 2005, 2006, maybe a little bit after that. But I'm interested in your take on the kind of best squad that the BBL could have put out over the years, if you like.
Yeah, it's always interesting because people go to me, was the league much better in 19 whatever, or is this team better than that team, and trying to compare things. And I think it's quite difficult because the game has changed in ways that are almost unrecognizable over the 30 years that the BBL has been going, and also the eligibility criteria has changed a lot, which has had a various different impacts. So back in 1987, when the BBL started, most teams had two Americans, maybe a dual national if you were lucky, and then local guys, in essence, filling out the rest of the bench. So your two Americans would score ridiculous amounts of points. And also, if you look at the season points per game average, those first few years of the BBL are off the charts compared to everything else. You know, defense went round the garden back in those days. People just piled up massive 100 points per game numbers, and you have guys averaging 30 points per game. And it's sort of, how do you compare that to now, where the overall points per game is much lower because they play more defense and because it's not concentrated in one or two guys just basically jacking up a load of shots. So those sort of things have really changed over the course of the time. And the other thing to bear in mind is that in 1987, when the BBL started, we were only 3 years into the three-point era.
That's true.
And I'm old enough to remember the old days when we didn't have a three-point line. And back then, the three-point shooters were specialist guys. You know, you had a Tim Lascelles or an Ian McKinney that was their job. They'd sit in the corner and hit three-pointers. And nowadays, everybody is shooting three. The idea of an Andy Thompson in 1987 would be bonkers. 6'10" guys out shooting threes. What's that all about? It just didn't happen. To be fair, it took probably 20 years for this to. We've really seen it in the sort of Steph Curryization of basketball over the last 3 years, where basically everything is in the NBA is a 3-point shot or a dunk, and nobody shoots mid-range jumpers at all anymore. Whereas that was a thing even 10 years ago, 5 years ago. People still shot mid-range jumpers. So the game itself has changed, not to mention, the shot clock changes. Going from 30 to 24 completely changed the game. And it doesn't sound like much, 6 seconds, but suddenly the pace of the game was totally different. And then the change to 14 seconds on the reset a few years ago, again, changed the game over. So it's... also the fouls, where you used to, on the 8th team foul, because we were playing halves and you got 8 fouls per half.
Yeah, that's right.
To take sideline possession. So you could just keep running the ball. And basically, if you were up by 4 points with a minute and a half to go, you could run the game out.
Yeah.
So
I forgot it was halves,
so
actually.
many things have changed that it's always hard to compare. So I kind of look at it as the best way is who were the best players of their era, and then we kind of just pile them all in together rather than saying this guy was better than that guy sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
that's the difficulty of it. But I forgot. I forgot it was halves. I've found found on YouTube an old Worthing Bears game, Worthing Bears Thames Valley Tigers from 1989, I think it was, 1989-90. And of which I found myself in the crowd with my dad, which was great.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I forgot it was halves. I'm thinking, why are they playing so long without a quarter break? And it's a huge change. And if you watch any of those games back as well, which I do quite regularly, I watch back some of the old Bears wins and whatnot through the years. The like you say, the pace of the game is so slow. They bring it up. They've got 30 seconds and it seems to like a full rotation of passing before anybody even attempts to do anything.
Yeah, it's like the old college. In the old days, college with a 45-second shot clock. And they would run 20 seconds of just passing the ball around the 3-point line before they even thought of doing anything. And it's sort of like, well, get on with it.
It's crazy. So if we go through... sort of, I guess, like you said, go through the eras, if you like, the different eras of time. But the first one I've got on the list is Alan Cunningham.
I knew you were going there first.
There's a combination of things there with that one. It's a durability thing. He obviously was in the league for about 10 years. There was only one season where he didn't win any silverware. The rest of the time he won at least one, if not 4 trophies in one season. But with him, what I was more surprised with was you expect him to have the kind of high stats early in his career. 2 or 3 seasons where he's got over 20 points a game, like you say, those early years when they were scoring a lot. But it drops off. His stats kind of drop off towards what you think is going to be the end of his career. And then those last 2 seasons with the Bears, he was back up to 15.9 points a game, 22.2 points a game in the league before going to the Towers, and it dropped off again. But the guy's career is just, I think, is phenomenal.
Yeah, and the other thing to bear in mind is he'd already played, I think it was about 5 seasons in the league before the BBL was formed. Now, most of his winning came in the BBL era. I don't think he won 1 cup in the seasons before the BBL came around, but most of his winning was in the BBL era, and he's tied 3rd for winners' medals with 21 medals all told. And of course, he had that amazing run of playoff successes. Basically, every year he went to Wembley and won. It didn't matter who he was playing for. Whether it was Portsmouth or Glasgow or Kingston or the Bears, he just kept on winning season after season, and nobody's won more playoff titles than him with those 8 wins. Thompson actually won his 7th this year with Leicester, so he's the closest guy to that. And you're right, you can't really have a conversation about BBL without putting Cunningham in, because not only was he this great winner and a tremendous player in the league for a long time, but also a showman, somebody that you remembered. If he was playing against your team, you knew who Alan Cunningham was, the whole swoop thing and all of that.
Yeah.
And he was just one of those guys that, the eye was always drawn towards him. And he did play different roles in the league. You're right in that. That's why his numbers varied. And some of the bits around where his points per game and contribution went down was when he was actually player coach. So he had more responsibility and was not playing as many minutes as he had done in the earlier seasons. And I think that was part of the bits around why the minutes weren't, the points weren't quite where they were in the other seasons.
So I think having him in, like you say, you can't really talk about a greatest BBL a collection of players without mentioning him. Obviously, the next one to that, who potentially could have been first on the list, if you like, is Alton Bird. He's another one who, just as much for his stuff that he did off the court as much as on, but he's another one. And I've not got the stats for this. I've read somewhere about it where he obviously came over and played. Hang on, that's my phone going off. He came over and he played National League first for Crystal Palace.
Yeah,
and they set records. They were one of the best. Teams of all time. It was Sutton United, I think it was, wasn't it, first? And then he just led the league in all sorts of areas, and just Go on, sorry.
That's the thing with Alton is you kind of, depends what age you are, but you kind of look back and think, oh, he was the guy who was at Kingston when they won everything every year and they had that 11 trophies in 3 years. And yes, he was, but actually he was something 10 years before that as well. Yeah. He's the one guy who has won the MVP award 2 years in a row twice. Yeah. There's only a few guys who've won it 2 years in a row, obviously Robinson and Fletcher recently, but he won it in 91 and 92, having won it in 80 and 81. And that's a remarkable feat if you think about it, because that's 10 years apart to back-to-back MVPs. And that says something about him. And I think Kevin Kalos used to say that Bird got overlooked because he was so good. And it was like, they would look to find anybody but Bird, because it's like, it's a bit like, and I'm not putting him on the same level as LeBron James, but LeBron James doesn't win the MVP every year, even though most people think he's the best player on the planet, because you sort of go, well, we expect that from him. And I think Bird had a bit of that where people just, Alton's doing that because that's what Alton does, rather than, that's something amazing. And if it was anybody but him, it would have been amazing. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where the level of expectation for him is much greater than the level of expectation for everybody else. But that being said, he's number 1, 2, and 5 in terms of assists per game across a season. So his first year in the BBL, 87-88, 10 assists per game. Now, again, I caveat with teams were averaging 100 points per game, but that's still 10 assists per game. He's the only guy to ever do that for a season. He was just under 10 a game in 89-90, and he was 9 a game in 90-91. So 3 of the top 5 all-time seasons in assists are Alton Bird. So again, the weight of numbers are things that you can't overlook. He also had a season shooting almost 70% from the floor. And when you look at field goal percentages through the history of the BBL, it's usually big guys. It's the Leonard Stewarts, the Martin Henlons, the Herman Reeds, Tommy Colliers, Rashad Hassans, guys like that who never shoot more than 2 feet away from the basket. But in 91-92, he was shooting 69% from the floor. So his name is all over the history of the statistics in the BBL and yet he played half his career before the BBL even came around. So, he's one of those guys who, when we look through the history, we draw this sort of arbitrary line because it's much easier to find the statistics from 87 onwards. But if you can get it all back to 72, he's way up there.
Absolutely. He's like you say, he's one of those guys you can't leave off this kind of list because of where he sits in history and what he was a part of. The thing as well that you say with the kind of LeBron James comparison, although not direct, but I know exactly what you mean. Just watching, and again that was on YouTube, was the and I've done it again. I can't remember the name of the famous snow game in Crystal Palace against the Greek team, who filled the arena before anybody else got there.
Yeah.
And it's won
Paris,
by.
Was it?
I think so. It's won by a buzzer beater at the end by Matthew Cunningham. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
But that play, they had. I forget the exact amount. They didn't have a great amount of time, obviously, to get the ball down the court. And I think Martin Henlon had the ball from a rebound, and he spent 2 or 3 seconds just trying to find Alton Bird. He had other people to pass to, but he was going to give it to Bird. That was it. He wasn't giving it anywhere else. He gave it to him, and obviously the rest is history. But incredible player. Feel free to add to the list as we go through, by the way, because I've got
one guy who often gets overlooked in that era is Martin Clark, who at that time, late 80s, was one of the best English players there was, and he was slightly punished by the sort of weird rules that FIBA had at the time, where if you'd played professionally, you weren't allowed play international. And at the time, there was only a handful of professional leagues. There was the NBA, the CBA, a couple other random American leagues you've never heard of. And the Philippines, for some reason, was always deemed to be. But the rest of the world, even though they were getting paid, was still deemed to be amateur by FIBA. And he'd played in some weird league in Boston or somewhere or other. And actually lost a lot of time internationally, and also in those days you were basically stuck in the country of your birth, because the eligibility rules were 2 foreign players (brackets Americans) and the rest had to all be domestic players. This was in the pre-Bosman era. Well, Martin Clark, to me, would have been a EuroLeague level player at that time. EuroLeague wasn't around at that time, but the equivalent competition. He was an unbelievably good player. 6'8", could shoot the ball like 6'8" guys couldn't shoot the ball at that period of time. Solid post player, great rebounder, and he was on that Kingston team of Cunningham and Bird, but he wasn't as showy as a Cunningham or Bird. And you look at his numbers, and I think he won 10, 11 titles while he was in the BBL. But basically, he was only in the BBL for 4 years. Yeah. So it was one of those where, actually, if you look at medals per season, he's right at the top of the list. And I think he's one of those guys who often gets overlooked. But if you were there at the time, he was one of the best players in the league.
That's one of the ones. I put this up on the forum WhatsApp a while ago, actually, just a suggestion of the best players. And he actually was a recurring name. And everybody said pretty much exactly what you just said, referring to the way he plays the game. But they specifically said he was just the best British player there was. Like you say, he's come through and played a limited amount of time in the BBL and basically cleaned up. That was it, really.
Yeah.
He's done the business, and not as showy, but his stats are still pretty good. He's still, I think, 1991 season, that particularly good season for the Kingston Kings. He's 19 points a game, maybe more, which is not to be sniffed at. But that's definitely one we can add on the list. I think there's a few guys on the WhatsApp forum that'll be happy about that, because that was like I said, that was a recurring name. Another one that was a recurring name that I didn't even consider, to be honest. I've seen him play, and he was a very offensively gifted player. Is Russ Sanders?
Yeah, now I was going to get into that because, again, Russ is another guy who probably his best years were through the 80s. So either side of that BBL line, and people kind of remember Russ, in the dog days of his career at Sunderland / Newcastle, and then I think he had a season at Cheshire as well.
Yes, yeah.
And he was at Sunderland when they weren't very good, and he was putting up big numbers because he didn't have much around him, but at his peak, he was as good a player as there has been. I would certainly agree with that. And again, he's another guy that if you look in the all-time statistics, he's all over the place. Points, assists, steals. He's at the top end of all of those categories. I think the style of play that he had, he could play now, and I don't think everybody from that area would translate into the way the game is played now, but Russ Saunders could, and I'm just having a look at some of his numbers. So second highest scoring season of all time, 33 points per game. Fourth highest, 32.8 points per game. He's got seventh and eighth highest assists per game season. He's got the highest assist total in a season, highest points score, one of only 3 guys to score 1,000 points in a season, and he did it in 4 games less than the other two guys. He's all over the place with the volume of numbers. Third highest in most steals per game, and again, he did that in a 28-game season, and the guy in second place who got 3 steals more than him did it in 36 games. So his numbers were different level. And I still go back to, actually, were his best seasons, at, was it Birmingham in the early 80s, I think it was. Yeah. Just phenomenal scorer, distributor, steal the ball. And I think there aren't too many guys around who can remember all of that early part of his career, and you might think, he just padded his numbers at the end when he was on a bad team, but that's definitely not the case.
He was a big part of that Kingston team that did so well as well, and as a kind of a bit of a super squad, really, well, a super team when you look at who was on it, with Alton Bird, Alan Cunningham, Russ Saunders as well. I think Colin Irish was on that team as well. It's just a loaded team.
I just looked at another thing here. Number 1 all-time in points per game, number 2 all-time in assists per game, number 2 all-time in steals per game, and that's for his entire career, not single season, for his entire career. And he was around for a long time.
Yeah.
And like you say, at some point people tend to tail off, but he never seemed to tail off, Russ Saunders. He just, all the way to the end, he just kept on filling up the stat sheet.
Yeah, I'll add him to the list, definitely. I think I'd say we go for 10. We've got 4 already. My next one that I've got on the list here is somebody else who I didn't realise he was around for quite so long, because of the kind of level he managed to keep at throughout his whole career, is Peter Scantlebury. I didn't think he started as early as he did, and yet his numbers sort of 4, 5, 6 seasons in, maybe even 7 seasons in. It's just the level of consistency is fantastic. Where would you stand on putting him on this list?
Yeah, definitely. And again, he has a little bit of pre-BBL line as well, and there were some pretty big numbers in the seasons before then. Probably didn't win quite as many medals as you would have thought that a guy of that level and ability would have won. Not quite sure why that is, but all-time BBL leading scorer, 8,300 points. I don't see anybody going past that for a very, very long time. I'm just trying to look down the list as Yorick was active this year. Yorick is 1,700 points behind him, so he's not going to catch him. Darius is the next guy on the list who was active this year, and he's 3,000 points behind him, so he's not going to catch him. So, Scanterbury is going to be that guy at the top of the list for, decades to come, I should imagine.
Yeah, great player. I remember my dad was always a big fan of his, which meant he was efficient. My dad always liked efficient players. Yeah.
And I seem to remember there was a season where there it is. I found it now, where he averaged 4 blocks per game, and he wasn't the biggest guy. And it's one of those things where you look at that number and go, 4 blocks per game. How did he? But he was athletic back in this was in 89, 90. So he'd have been in his prime at that point, and a good defender as well, and a great leader. And obviously went on to become a coach as well. But Scamps is an all-time legend of the English game.
Absolutely. We'll pop him on the list. That brings us to 5.
You're never going to keep to 10 here.
I don't think we are we? Have you anyone you want to chuck in?
No, you keep going, and I'll see if you've missed anybody at the end.
Nigel Lloyd was the next one that was extremely popular on the list, and obviously again someone who's had a considerable career. I mean, looking down the list, where does he stand in terms of career points? Because his points per game, as for a huge chunk of time, was 20 plus. And obviously finished up as player coach, and then obviously coach in the end of the Lions, and just a great career. It's a superb player to watch. I didn't realise how many teams he'd been at. I really remembered his time at Thames Valley, but a great player.
Yeah, he's in terms of career, he's second all-time behind Scants in scoring, second all-time behind Fab in assists, second all-time behind Fab in steals. I mean, Nigel was one of those guys that when you watched him, he just dictated the whole game. He just controlled the whole game. And it was like, if his team was in a position to win with 4 minutes to go, they would win because he would just control everything. And actually, when he was a player coach, I think he was better than when he was not a player coach, because he always had himself on the court. And he never quite got that point guard that was at the level that he was at that time. And of course, you go back to he started out well. His high point was, as you say, with Thames Valley when they won the league, and he was the MVP in 1994, and of course Birmingham with Nick Nurse and winning that 1996 playoff final that Nick was referring to in his interviews after winning the NBA finals last week. Again, just if you needed a point guard to come up with the right decision and make the right play, there's not been too many better than Nigel. He could score, he could pass the ball, but he controlled the tempo of the game. If they needed to go quick, they went quick, and he read the game so tremendously well.
Yeah, a worthy addition, I think, to the list. And just a really long, successful career, I think, as well, is something you can't. When you're doing a list like this, obviously there's all sorts of different things to take into account, especially in the BBL, where players come for maybe a couple of seasons or even less than that. It's just a season and they perform extremely well. But longevity, I think, goes a long way, and like you say, particularly the levels of success he had, just excellent. Next one I've got is a little bit more modern, I think, in terms of being probably about 20 years ago instead of further back. Tony Dorsey, obviously 2-time MVP as well. Just statistically excellent. His points and rebounds really, really consistent through his time here. And he obviously got enough silverware to warrant a space on this list as well. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, Dorsey's one of my all-time favourite players, and I sort of think of him in that sort of Birmingham mid-90s team. We were talking about a moment ago with Russ Saunders about 3 guys who scored 1,000 points in a season. Dorsey was one of the other 2. He scored 1,000 in 95, 96, and a guy for the big occasion as well. He was one of those guys that when it was on the line, he came to play. He won as well as his 2 MVPs. He won 4 finals MVPs as well, including the 96 and the 98 playoff finals when the Bullets won both of those. Just really tough to guard. Great on the low block. Had a really tough shot, mid-range shot to later on in his career play a lesser role on other teams. I think he was at the Guildford team that was in Europe, and he played for Manchester as well, and just made good decisions. And as you say, in his pomp, in his heyday, just a phenomenal scorer of the ball. Really difficult to defend against. Just caused all sorts of matchup problems because he was thick set and strong, as well as having a nice touch around the basket.
Yeah, no, I agree. We'll definitely add him. I think two-time MVP is not to be sniffed at, is it really, as well? When you look at how many players have won it in the past, and I mean that's at this stage is still the kind of the record, isn't it? I mean, it's been equalled by a number of players. Alton Bird did it first. And obviously Justin Robinson has done it recently. Well, he's definitely got a chance to take it to 3. But that the 2-time MVP thing was kind of a big deal for me when looking at that. Yeah,
and obviously Bird won 2 before the BBL as well, just to give him that thing. I mean, again, it's one of those things. If you're chunking it into eras, he was that sort of mid-90s. He was the superstar. There was a few guys around at that time who were, the dominant players of the time. I'm thinking of him. I'm thinking of John McCord and Tony Holly and guys like that. He was, of his era, he was one of the best.
Well, it's funny you mentioned John McCord because he's next on the list.
Interesting, because I always thought at the time that John was probably the best player of his era who didn't win the MVP. He was always, just short of it. You know what I mean? And obviously won some MVPs in finals. But I'm talking about player of the year. And again, another guy that I really like watching. Very athletic, could attack the basket really well. Had a nice mid-range shot back in the day when people used to still take mid-range shot, and actually played a long time in the BBL in the end. He bounced around a few clubs, but he was around for a long time and a consistent performer.
Well, do you think he's a lock for the list for this list?
It's interesting, isn't it? It's one of those things as it almost feels like he needed an MVP award.
Sure,
but his numbers are really good. Don't get me wrong. It's if we were doing 10, and I'll wait and see who else you've got on the list. Is can you squeeze him into the top 10? But he was a consistent every year, at least 20 points per game. And again, that's not an easy thing to do across the course of 7 seasons he played in the BBL. 20 points per game every year for 3 different clubs. He'd certainly be right there. He'd certainly be right there.
Well, there's another player who's, I think he was MVP though. Actually, there's another player is around that kind of generation as well. Is Terrell Myers. He was very popular on the What's Bev feed, and obviously going through his stats and you can still catch highlights of him on YouTube as well. He had a great stint in the BBL, not as long perhaps as some, but I mean, 5 or 6 seasons maybe. Great scorer. He's averaging over 20 points a game. Another call for that list, but obviously the MVP. So maybe he goes above John McCourt.
And the thing that he has is the big moments. So he had 6 seasons in total, 4 at Sheffield and a couple at the Towers. But when I think back, I think now obviously I'm slightly biased because my peak moment as a commentator in BBL was Terrell Myers to win the league, and that's the one when I retire from commentary, that'll be unless something amazing happens in the future, that's still number one. It was in my first season of working on Sky, and that's my instant vision is him selling the head fake to St Kitts and stepping underneath and hitting that long range too, and of course he hit game winners in the cup final. I think it was did he hit? Well, I think he hit the last shot in one of either the cup or the playoffs, but there was another 30 seconds to go. But it did end up being the game winner. And of course, obviously in the final where Amici dominated in the trophy, still the lasting image is his shot to win it, and Chris Finch running down the sidelines, pointing. I think it was Yuri Matchin. He was pointing down the sidelines, and of course they won the trophy, and that is what Terrell has more than pretty much anybody in BBL history. He has those multiple iconic moments of game-winning shots on the grandest stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and it's hard to believe, but actually the first year he was in the BBL, he was a 6th man. First year at the Sharks, he came off the bench and was a 6th man, and it was like, is this? And then he became Terrell Myers, if you like. But that first year, he had a fairly limited role as a 6th man off the bench.
Yeah, 14 points a game off the bench, by the looks of it.
And 24 minutes. And yet every season after that, he was 32, 33 minutes per game.
Well, I'll edge him in ahead of John McCord at this stage. We'll see how we get on.
Okay.
There's another one on here actually. I've just looked down the list. I don't think he was MVP. I think he was overlooked for MVP. But James Hamilton, Chester Jets, his fairly brief stint. I think he came into the Bears first of all. I think he was a Bears player first of all, and then obviously 3 seasons where he's averaged decent points, decent rebounds. But he was very popular on the feed that we had going. So, how do you feel about James Hamilton?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure he's on this list because of the numbers of some of the other guys in terms of medals won and overall longevity and stuff like that. Great player, consistent player, sort of guy you'd want on your team. But I don't know that the body of work is going to be enough for the top 10 all-time BBL. But I know why he's getting a lot of love, because there will be fans out there particularly from Cheshire who will be giving him plenty of love, because he was such a great player for them across the course of he had 2 spells there. I think he had about 7 seasons in total. Obviously as you say, he started out at the Bears and also a couple of stints with the Towers as well. I don't know that when you add it, or he had a few really good seasons numbers wise, but I don't know when you add it all up that he's going to be in your top 10.
No, we'll keep him to the side. There was another Chester Jets player that was very popular as well. Somebody who had a lot of success throughout his career, and obviously at Chester is Lauren Meyer. Yeah,
interesting one, because he came, and obviously he was a former NBA player at the in the season that he came, and you sort of looked at him and went, really? This guy's NBA player at the start of the season? Because I can't remember, was it a knee injury or something? He'd come off the back of an injury, and it took him a while to really get back into shape. But boy, by the end of the season, you could see how good he was.
Yeah.
He really, as I say, once he got into shape, he suddenly became completely unguardable because of the size of him, the strength of him, and you could see the skill set that he had as to how he got to the NBA for a couple of years.
Well, we'll put him on the short list. We'll put him in the pool, as it were.
The one thing with that is I don't know that he played one season. I don't think you could have a one season guy in your list.
No, fair enough. Fair enough. That makes it easier to make the 10.
Okay, that's good. I'm here to make it easy for you.
John White was the next one. I'm not sure how many seasons he played in total. I've got a couple of stat lines for seasons that he played, but another phenomenal scorer in a pretty competitive period of time in the BBL, and obviously I think he's got the MVP as well to add to that. Where do you stand on John White?
Yeah, I mean, a tremendous 3-point shooter. He played 4 years in the league. Him and Eric Burks at the Leopards really took the league by storm. The pair of them. You had the speed of Burks before he had those injuries, which kind of slowed him down in later years, and the 3-point threat. And John was one of those guys where he could just take it away from you in the blink of an eye. And I remember doing a game, I think he was at Manchester at the time, and he had something like 35 points at halftime, and he was just a ridiculous amount of threes. I think he'd hit like 8 or 9 threes in the first. It was something crazy like that. And he was that guy, just a killer scorer. First 3 years, 25.5, 25, 26 points per game. Dropped off a little bit in that last season he had with the Towers. Tremendous scorer. And I think if I can have a look at the all-time scoring, I'm pretty sure he's somewhere in the season's points per game, somewhere in that list. Can't see him now, but I'm sure he is. And a great free throw shooter as well. He was he was pretty accurate. The one thing with him again is that enough seasons in the BBL, as you say, did have an MVP year. Is that a long enough time for somebody to be in the top 10? 4 years, it was quite impactful. 5 medals, a couple of league titles. Again, he's another one for me that would be on the cusp, probably.
He's in the pool. He's in the
yeah.
He's in the running. We're going to go back in time again now for the next one. It would be one of my choices, particularly because obviously he played down at Worthing. It's Colin Irish, part of some of the best teams to play in the BBL. Tremendous scoring guard, I guess you'd call him. Although he wasn't a small guy, he was a pretty big guy.
No, he was the shape of a forward, but he could shoot like a guard. Back in the days when those things were different, of course, now everybody shoots.
Yeah.
The thing I always remember about Colin is, if he wasn't on your team, boy, did you hate him. Boy, and it was one of those things where actually there's something about that guy. It's a bit like Charles Smith, where you sort of look at him and you go, man, I hate that dude because he's so good. If you're the fan of the other team, you just sort of, man, every time you think we're going to beat them, this guy comes up and kills us. And Colin was a bit like that, where he was so good it was annoying. And I think he holds the record for points in a playoff final. It was the year before the BBL. He had 40-something. I remember being at Wembley. I think it was 42 points or something in a playoff final. And the MVP for that it was either the year or 2 years before the BBL that he did that. But Colin was that guy. And the other thing is that there was no point in screaming and shouting at him because all that did was infuriate him. And then he would kill you. And he was just one of those ruthless guys where actually your best bet was to try and be nice and respectful to him and hope that he didn't take it out on the team. I remember being at Worthing Leisure Centre for a game. and the Bears were down 10, 12, 13 points, something like that. And there was only 7 or 8 minutes to go in the game. And the referees, they were debating whether there was a technical or a block charge or something or other. And they just spent forever going, well, what do you think? What do you think? And it was going on. And Colin just went, I've had enough of this now. I'm getting annoyed. And he's just like, can we get on with the game? And the referees were still faffing about. And it took like 3 or 4 minutes for the referees to work out what they're doing. By which point, Colin was off the charts, upset with these referees for taking. So he took it out on the other team and he went bang, 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 3-3-3. And suddenly, in the space of about a minute and a half, the Bears were back in front. They went on to win the game. And it was like, if the referees had made a quick decision, he probably wouldn't have done that. And they probably would have lost the game. And he was that guy where he could just, in the blink of an eye, and I remember, funnily enough, I found the old VHS tape of it. It was one of my first ever games for a cable TV channel where the Bears had won the league, and they were playing at Granby Halls, and they needed to win the game to win the league, and there'd been a crash on the M1 or something or other. And so they were an hour late, and the game ticked off at 9 o'clock or something stupid like that. And you think, man, they might struggle here because they've been sat on a bus for 8 hours or what it is. He just came out and went boom, 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 and they were up 10-15 at the end of the first quarter, and the game was over. And it was like, and that to me, that was Colin. Colin could just take the game away from you. It didn't matter, whatever. Just an amazing scorer. And if he was on your team, he was the greatest player you ever seen. And if he wasn't on your team, boy, did you dislike him because he was so good.
Well, I think we're going to add him to the list. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, and 10 medals as well. 10 medals as well to go with that. There's only 15 guys or so who've got to double figures. So, yeah, definitely.
And he's got the MVP as well for that 92-93 season with the Bears. Yeah, I enjoyed watching him. Like you say, he did frustrate at times. His shot selection wasn't always great, but like you say, he would always come through in the end and come up with the points you needed.
Most definitely.
Yeah. There's another name on the list here that was quite a popular choice. I believe he's got MVP as well. Yeah, Clyde Vaughan.
Clyde, yeah, indeed, and again another one from before the BBL era. Phenomenal scorer, classic shooter. In the old days when people used to shoot the bank shot, they don't do that very much anymore off the glass. But again, another one who could put up massive numbers offensively. He was a dual national, so he came over. I think it was like 84 or 85 or something. So played just before the BBL, but essentially born and raised in raised in America. But I think he briefly was born in London or something and moved over at the age of 2. But was essentially an American who had a British passport, so he counted in old money as a dual national. And boy, that was a guy. If you had him on your team, you were grateful for that because it was tough to get points out of those other spots. But again, he was another one. He knew where the basket was, and he could certainly fill it up.
So, do you think he's a lock for the list?
I'm just trying to work out now how many seasons he played in the BBL. I'm just going to look up on my
I was
list,
interested actually how much silver he got, because the MVP he got obviously was for Sunderland and not a traditionally successful team, but obviously he did move around a bit after.
Yeah, he played in Leicester first year of the BBL, and he played at least 1 year before that in Leicester, if not 2, and then he played 3 years at Sunderland, and he was part of that team that won the one trophy that Kingston didn't win over the 3 years, where they had him and they had Bucknell and Scott Patterson and Russ Saunders, and they just had a ton of offense. My thing with him, again, 4 seasons. Now, don't get me wrong, 28 points per game for 4 seasons is pretty impressive. He 29.5, 28.5, 27.8, 26. So, just really good numbers, shooting 43% from the 3-point line. My one thing on him, as you say, is number one, is that enough seasons? And I kind of skew for the guys who played before the BBL, that you got to count another couple of years before that.
Yeah.
But again, in the era of Kingston, that's his only medal because he didn't play for Kingston, and it's one of those. I always think it's interesting when you look at the guys who've won lots of medals in the BBL. What you see is some all-time legendary guys who've been around, and then you see somebody who happened to be on the right team during their golden period. If you see what I mean. Didn't necessarily put up massive numbers on that team, but was part of a winning team. And how you balance, Steve Tomacek, who's got 10 winners' medals in a very bit part role, versus Clyde Vaughan, who's got one as a dominant player over the course of the same period in time.
Yeah, it's tricky. We'll put. I'll put him down, and we'll see how we get on.
Okay.
A few more. Steve Bucknell is the next. You mentioned it just now, but Steve Bucknell is the next one. Obviously, the lofty heights of the NBA for him, but his game really changed as well over the period of time. He was, well, to my mind anyway. He originally looked a bit of a ball handler as he came up through the ranks, and then obviously when he came back and finished up at the Towers, he was a bit more of a kind of a post player, and but again, great stats, great numbers, and just when you think of the BBL and you think of, well, particularly London and basketball around there, but towards the end, Steve Bucknell was a big part of that, and I believe he's got a position currently, hasn't he, involved with British basketball, but a great player. Yeah, tremendous player, and again, one of the most unlikely transfers of all time to go from the LA Lakers to the Sunderland, whatever they were at the time, Scorpions, I think they were at Scorpions,
the time. It's one of those that I don't think we'll see the like of that again. Put it that way. But yeah, I mean, 8 seasons in the BBL. The early part of that. A big scorer, and then towards the end, certainly the last couple of years, he had it at Leicester, more of a game facilitator, a guy who made the right decisions, got his team involved. I think he's one of those guys that, because of who he is and what he did, not all necessarily in the BBL. He's one of those guys that you want to shoehorn into this list because, he had a great BBL career. Don't get me wrong. He did have a great BBL career. But the things he did, at college and making it to the NBA and playing in Europe as well, it's sort of like you take that all in the round and think, wow, this is one of the best English players we've ever had.
Absolutely. I can remember the buzz of him, coming back and playing. Just a great talent to watch, wasn't he? He like you say, towards the end, he became a bit more of a facilitator, but he still had that impact. He still had that ability to turn a game. He had great court vision, and he was always an opposition to the teams I used to root for and watch. And he was it was almost like you described Colin Irish in a way. You you wanted him on your team as an opposition. Not him again. He's going to come up with something when they need it.
Yeah, definitely. Probably not quite as boisterously as Colin did, but yeah, definitely a guy that when you saw him walk in, you thought, "Oh no, we're in trouble here tonight."
Well, we've got 10 potentially on the list now. I've got only a few more. Just going down the list I've got here of the ones we came up with. Billy Singleton's the next one on the list I've got here. Statistically, obviously, there's from what I've got on my thing is 3 seasons where he was a pretty phenomenal scorer. It drops off a little bit after that, but obviously then it's almost like the rebounds kind of stay with him. Again, another one of those players. He kind of, for me, when I was watching, he almost became a little bit like folklore, Billy Singleton. It was like you heard the name and you recognised the name, and there weren't many kind of names that were household names, if you like. But he seemed to be one of them. How do you rank him in terms of this list?
Well, disclosure, Billy I love. I known Billy for a long time, and he was a guy that he was hilarious, and I used to get on really well with Billy. So if I can shoehorn him into this list, I will try my hardest. Longevity. 13 years in the BBL, bounced around a lot of clubs. I can see why he would come up if you're throwing it out to fans, because he played in a lot of places and he was such a nice bloke that everybody would love him wherever he went. And I think there's also that element of you see him and you go, that dude surely can't play basketball. Look at the size of him. No way he can play basketball. And then you watch him play and you go, man, can he play? And hands and feet, unbelievable hands and tremendous footwork. But he was a big dude, and particularly at the beginning of the season, he always used to get full value out of the off season, I think it was, and then by the end of the year, he was in trim shape for Billy. And of course, when they had him with Ricardo Leonard. At Cheshire, they were the pie eaters. And I think it was the Sun or so one of the tabloids did a story about the two pie eaters and how much food they would eat, the pair of them, because they were big guys. But just a really nice guy, but a great player as well. And he won some award for best player in New York City.
Really?
Back in the days when he was a bit slimmer. Yep. When he was coming up, I think it's called like the Iron Horse or something like that. And you don't win that by accident. You've got to be a pretty good player to win that. And obviously went to St. John's, which is at the time was the big school, biggest school, one of the big schools in the Big East. And obviously a lot of New Yorkers want to play for St. John's. And just a deceptively good player, because you sort of looked at him and thought he's not athletic, he can't move very much, but his hands and his feet, and that was the thing and once he got his feet in the right place, you weren't moving him. And he just I'll never forget in the playoff final in 2001 when he was playing for Leicester, and they only really had a 6-man team at the time, and Carl Brown blew his knee out early on in the game, so they were essentially running 5 players. And Billy was really struggling by the end. And just seeing him, he'd leaked out in front. And he was chasing down the court trying to run this fast break layup with, I think it was McKinney or Payne or somebody chasing him back. And Kevin Cagle on the replay going, "Run, Billy, run!" Like that. It was hilarious. And as you say, in the early days, his numbers went that first year at Birmingham, 27 points per game. The early years at Cheshire and Leicester again, 20 points per game. It kind of tailed off. I think the ability to get back into peak physical shape towards the mid 2000s was a bit more of a challenge for him. But longevity for sure. And as I say, if I skew my bias, I would definitely have Billy in the end. 5 medals, a couple of leagues, couple of playoffs, and a cup. Is that enough? I don't know, but boy, he's a nice guy.
We'll put him in the running because that's great. I love that. Awesome. I'll just go through the list of the last couple that are on the thing now. One, of course, is one of the other few players that have won 2-time MVP, and that's Trey Moore. Obviously, once with the Jets, once with the Eagles. Again, statistically, just when you're looking down the players that are on this list that we're kind of putting together, there's a real pattern, and the pattern is obviously the stats are just A, they're consistent, and B, they rarely drop below what you consider to be a high level, whether it's rebounds, assists, scoring. But he's another one of those guys. He just kind of ticks boxes.
Yeah, I mean, by all accounts, tricky to coach, but boy, you'd have him on your team because he was just a phenomenal scorer of the basketball. In any way you wanted him to do, he could put the ball and in the basket. And raw talent wise, as good as there's been. I mean, nearly 22 points per game for his career. He played 6 seasons? Birmingham, Cheshire, Newcastle, and I can't remember if they were Everton or Mersey at the time, but a season there as well. And as you say, consistent every year. You knew what you got, and you knew if he wasn't the league MVP that year, he was going to be close to it because he was that good. And you know, to be that good for 6 years is not easy to keep at that high level. Just one of the talent-wise, one of the better players of all time, really, in the BBL.
Do we put him on the list? That's the question.
I mean, again, I guess look, all of these things are always from perspective, isn't it? So you sort of go, well, five medals, 6 seasons, great scoring, super talented. It's one of those things. I think some people would say yes, some people would say no. I don't think either are wrong.
We'll put him in that little bracket we've got going at the moment, which has currently got 7 or 8 players.
Probably 10 players. Yeah.
We should do 2 teams, just have them square off and see which one's best. Yeah.
See which one wins.
I've got 2 left. One is a personal one of mine, and there's this guy who I don't think got an MVP, but he seems to have been a real fan favourite. I don't remember him in any great detail, but it's TJ Walker, obviously part of not a huge. From what I could gather, not a massive amount of time in the league, but I mean decent stats, and not potentially up with some of the stats we've got so far. But where do you stand on TJ?
Yeah, I think your fan poll has been infiltrated by Newcastle and Cheshire fans, because we've been skewing with quite a few of them. TJ actually played 8 years. 8 years in the BBL.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 8 years. 7 of them with Newcastle, and then he had half a season or so with Cheshire as player coach, if I remember. Again, great distributor of the ball. Another one who found his teammates well. His career average 6 assists per game he's dropped down to 5th now. He was at 3rd, but both Fletcher and Josh Wiltshire have played enough games now at the start of the season. I have 100 as a minimum number of games to get into the career, and they've both gone past 100 now, so just edged him down into 5th. But if you're picking a Newcastle all time, he's right there with them. Just a phenomenal. And at an important time in Newcastle history as well, because it's quite easy to sit here and go, oh well, Newcastle are the dominant team. They were, twas ever thus. They were always winning, blah blah blah. But some of us are old enough to remember when they were not very good. And he was part of that era where they were turning into what we now know Newcastle to be. Won 6 titles with them, and of course had that backcourt duo for a long of that with Jeremy Hyatt, who was the 3-point gunner that he would always find. Tremendous passer of the ball, could score as well, but a good ball handler, another one who could control a game, and no doubt about it that Newcastle Eagles fans will have fond memories of him.
He's definitely. I mean, I didn't specifically remember him, if I'm honest. I did recognise the name. It wasn't one that jumped out at me, which obviously I'm quite pleased to have you on to talk it through, because he was one I wasn't so sure about. But yeah, we'll put him down on the off list for that one.
Okay,
like you say, he would make an Eagles all-time team definitely, but. This last one is a personal one of mine, just because, I mean, he didn't play long enough in the league. For what he played, I believe he got in, silverware each year, and that's Herman Hareed. Just the rebounding and scoring, just phenomenal.
The round mound of rebound, Herman Reed. Yeah, he was. I mean, he was another big unit, but strong. You know, massive, big, strong, huge shoulders, big arms, great rebounder. Obviously, part of the Bears teams that won a couple of playoffs. I think that's your homerism there, trying to squeeze Herman Reed into the list. He only played a couple of years. I mean, good numbers: 20, 22, 23 points per game, double figure rebounds. Yeah. He was a great player, but a couple of years, I'm not sure. Enough, yeah. I'm not sure you crowbar him in on the back of that.
No, it's definitely not enough. He was just for the time he was there. He was just one of my favourites. He had played in the NBL previously as well for the Bears for a season or two, I think, before coming back again.
I would imagine, and I haven't got it to hand, but I would imagine his numbers in the NBL were off the charts.
He was. I can remember there was a huge buzz about him coming back because I think we'd already won the first playoffs under Alan Cunningham, and he came in for the second and third, and it was like, wow, this is, we've done this without him, and he's coming in, and the excitement of him coming in, probably part of the admiration for him. But that pretty much is what we've got from the guys on What's Bev and from various Twitter things that we've put out. The only other one in there who obviously probably doesn't have enough in terms of seasons played is John Amici. Had great stats for when he played, and but maybe not enough to go on this list.
No, I think you're glaring omission, and shame on the people of What's Bev. And I realise you've sort of gone to an era, but to bring you a little bit more up to date, I don't think I could have a list of all-time great BBL players without Drew Sullivan on it.
See, now I was going to ask you about that specifically because you're right. Everybody seemed to dive back in time, if you like, and go back to these eras of players and that. But yeah, no, I agree with that. He's more of a modern, obviously more of a modern player than pretty much every single one we've looked at. But yeah, he's definitely left his mark on the BBL.
Yeah, I mean, 20 titles. Won at multiple clubs, and the other thing about Sullivan was he was there at the beginning. Newcastle hadn't. He was there at the beginning of Newcastle winning. He was obviously there at the beginning of the Tigers winning, although that didn't last very long, and at the beginning of Leicester winning as well. And the thing about it is, again, if you look at his numbers, they're probably not going to go. If I just gave you a list of here's everybody's averages for their BBL career, you wouldn't get anywhere near Drew Sullivan because he didn't dominate like that. He dominated moments. He dominated time, and they were the big moments and the big time, and that was where things were won. And it was just that sort of like he won games with a offensive rebound, or he won games with a defensive stop, or he won games with a block shot. And it's like those things don't really quantify into Russ Saunders averaging 30 points per game for a season, but it adds up to 20 titles. And there's only a handful of guys that have won 20 titles and 2 MVPs and another I think is it 6 finals MVPs, which is more than anybody else. The 8, if you add it all up, is more than anybody else. The 6 finals MVPs is more than anybody else. And it's sort of like, and you sort of think about it, and probably the best summation of Sullivan was the cup final against Newcastle. It might have been 2013. I can't quite remember, where Newcastle were winning the game. And it looked, with 4 minutes to go, like Newcastle were going to win the game. And Sullivan just went, and just did everything at both ends of the floor to win the game. And you kind of remember it for Jorge Calvo hitting a 3 at the end. But everything else was Sullivan. Yeah. And it's like there's not too many guys that could just take over a game for 2 or 3 minutes. Charles Smith, who again, I'd struggle to have a list without Charles Smith in. Charles Smith was another guy like that who could, Charles Smith in the trophy final against Leicester in Glasgow, I think it was the following year, where it looked like Leicester were going to win and he hadn't really done anything, and then he went bang, 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 3 threes in a row. Thank you very much. We'll have the trophy and go home celebrating. And I think that's the thing with Sullivan, where if you look at his statistics, it doesn't tell the impact and the dominance. And to be honest with you, 2 MVPs, I thought he should have had a third. I thought he should have had one the year Leicester won the league, and I think he didn't get it because he was 6th man. Right. And it was 22 minutes per game. But I thought he was the MVP of that season, because I don't think Leicester would have got anywhere near winning the league without Drew Sullivan that season. So to me, and I could sit here and go Fab Flanoy, Darius Defoe, Andy Thompson, and Henlon, other guys like that who've won loads, and where do we put those in that list? And Fab's another interesting one, isn't he? Because his game evolved so much.
Oh yeah,
over I've lost count how many years he's been playing now. 20 odd years he's been playing.
It's crazy.
Totally different player from different roles. Plays any position you like. Wins everything all the time. More medals than anybody else as a player. And you sort of, again, it's that sort of what do stats mean versus what do medals mean, and how do you balance all of that up? But that, that's the beauty of things like this, isn't it? Because we've sat here for however long it is, and we could go on for another 2 hours arguing over this player and that player and who's on the thing, and people at home will be sitting listening to us going, but you've missed out, whoever it is. How have you not talked about whoever it is? And it's just like, well, I just didn't think of that guy at that time.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I think maybe it's because of the fairly recent Charles Smith, particularly, that people didn't really consider it, in terms of looking back. And
I get that. If we're looking back, and we've kind of looked at it from sort of pre-BBL up until I don't know, about 2000, early 2000s, mid 2000s, and that's the point at which that you start to get the Smiths and the Sullivans, although Fab does go back to the 90s, to be fair to him. And again, there's that balance of what do you value in if you're picking a team, if you're picking the 10 best players of all time, Fab Flanoy probably isn't on that list. But if you're picking the 10 most influential or 10 most 10 guys who dominated a period of time, then you 25 medals. Nobody else has won 25 medals, and Darius as well. And Darius is one of those guys where through all of that time we've talked about TJ Walker and we talk about Trey Moore, and we talk about all these other guys who played, and Darius is there the whole time just doing what Darius does, killing you down on the low block or hitting elbow jumpers and
still
doing what needs to be done defensively, and 24 medals. When you look back on it, you sort of go, wow, that's an unbelievable career. But again, he's one of those, he's probably more understated, and it's easy to remember the highlight guys, isn't it? It's easy to remember the guys who kill you in that sort of spectacular way, rather than the ones who grind you away season in, season out, and say, thank you very much, I'll have another winner's medal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's I mean, unless you've got any more to add, potentially, that's kind of it. We've ended up with like a
I've got another 25 names here. No. We'll be here all night.
John Thomas. What about John Thomas? Could shoot with
both
hands.
Again, there's your Cheshire fans coming in big for John Thomas. He was an explosive player. I'm guessing, without looking, not enough seasons. We can put him in the not enough seasons, bro.
Yeah. That's how we should do it. Look at it like that. But I mean, the list I've got of the kind of the people we've got that are almost shoehorned in, if you like, if we're going to do this kind of thing. It's Alan Cunningham, Alton Bird, Martin Clark, Russ Saunders, Peter Scanterbury, Nigel Lloyd, Tony Dorsey, Terrell Myers, Colin Irish, Steve Bucknell, and then, of course, if we come a little bit more modern, that's 10, but then, of course, we've got Drew Sullivan and Charles Smith potentially on that kind of, in that realm, if you like, slightly more modern players.
I'd take that team against anybody.
Absolutely. And that which leaves off the bench Darius Defoe, Billy Singleton, Trey Moore, Clyde Vaughan, John White, Lauren Meyer, and John McCourt.
I'm not sure all of them would be too happy coming off the bench. Some egos to manage in that.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed this. It's been great because this is kind of the sort of stuff that my wife doesn't want to hear, really, when I talk about the greatest BBL players of all time.
This is fine.
So I thank you very much for your time. This has been great.
No problem. It's a pleasure.